Welcome to episode 3 of the Princeton podcast with Mayor Mark Freda. In this episode, Mark sat down with Bernie Hvozdovic, Princeton's municipal administrator. They discussed Bernie's background, his administrative duties, and the topic of municipal taxes. So without any further introduction, let's join our host, Mark Freda, and his guest, Bernie Hvozdovic, for episode 3 of the Princeton podcast.
Bernie Hvozdovic, thank you for taking time to join me today on Princeton Podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Our goal today is to help our listeners learn more about the role you play as Princeton's municipal administrator. So I think today we'll kind of ask you 3 questions. What led you to municipal government? How did you get to Princeton? And what do you actually do as an administrator?
Fair question.
So let's hit the first one, Bernie. What led you to municipal government?
So my transition into municipal government wasn't the traditional path. I started out of college. I was an economics major. Worked for Merrill Lynch for a couple of years. Decided to go to law school. Did that. I spent about 20 years as a trial attorney. I am certified by the Supreme Court of New Jersey as a civil trial attorney. The town I grew up in, South Brunswick, is where I currently live, and I was pretty involved in the town. I was the chair of the Recreation Committee for about 15 years. I sat on any number of commissions, obviously grew up in the town, still live there. And one day, the manager who I knew was retiring, and I read the posting for his position, and I said, I can do this, and put my hat in the ring for that, and was one of any number of people that got interviewed, and I ended up with that position and served as the township manager in South Brunswick for the next 10 years, so from roughly 2011 to 2021.
Thank you. So, all right, so you were in South Brunswick. Now you're in Princeton. So how did that jump happen?
So kind of same thing. I didn't expect to leave South Brunswick, raised my family there. My wife and 2 girls still live there, live in the Kingston section of South Brunswick, and thought I'd retire from there. And then the position for the administrator of Princeton came up. Now, while you call it administrator, it's the same thing. Township manager, city manager, it goes by a lot of names depending on the form of government. But same thing. I read the posting, was interested in it. I received a phone call from a friend who said, I think this would be a good opportunity for you. You may want to take a look at it. Talk to my wife. Princeton, I wasn't looking for another job. Princeton would have been the only other municipality I would have been interested in. Having grown up just across the border in South Brunswick, I've spent roughly the last 45 years of my life in Princeton. So I've known it as a kid since the late 70s. So I was very comfortable with Princeton. I knew the issues. I do my shopping here, get my hair cut here. My church is in Princeton. So I kind of lived my life in Princeton. So the transition was easier in that respect. So I put in my resume, as you know, and, as I understand it, there was about 68 other applicants from across the country, and was lucky enough after about 11 hours of interviews and written statements to end up with a position. So that's how I got here, and I'm here for a little over 3 months now.
That's great. And it's also interesting, I think, that you mentioned that you lived in Kingston, but you spend a lot of your life in Princeton. So a lot of your activities, it seems, for many years have been in town.
Absolutely. As a kid, we'd get on the bus on Route 27, come into Princeton and play basketball in Dillon Gym, and then have pizza at Victor's Pizza back in the day. In college, there was Marita's Cantina, where Triumph is now. I'd hit that. Worked at Springdale Golf Course for a little bit. So, my life Princeton's been a big part of my life ever since I was a kid. You've got a business district. We didn't have that in South Brunswick. There's a lot more restaurants. You've got the university, which is great. And, so I spent a lot of time here over the years.
So I think that we should point out to our listeners that the fact that you have spent so much time in Princeton, even though you didn't live in Princeton, municipalities often say the best employee is someone that lives in the town. So you're pretty invested in Princeton. You were pretty invested before we hired you.
I was, and continue to be. So we have dinner here a lot with my family, and I think that's good, because if you have an administrator who lives outside of the area, once that person leaves, it's kind of they're gone for the day. But here, because I'm always around town, one, I'm noticing things around town and, hey, can we get that cleaned up? Can we do this? But two, then people come up to me. You know, I'm meeting with shop owners, restaurant owners, and they tell me the issues they currently have. And then we're able to deal with that, you know, back at the municipal building here. So it works well.
Your role as the administrator, manager in South Brunswick, now the administrator in Princeton, two different towns. What's the difference between the two? There's some significant ones. One, there are two different forms of government. One's council manager form, that's South Brunswick, and Princeton is the borough form. In South Brunswick, we had a mayor and 4 council members. In Princeton, we have a mayor and 6 council members. So there's 40% more council members. So there is a larger number there. You know, generally, municipal government, I have this kind of the same duties in both towns. Some of the bigger differences in Princeton is one, Princeton has a phenomenal recreation facility by way of the pool we have here. And it is, if you've not seen it, it's an Olympic-sized pool with some extra pools on the side and a kiddie pool and a diving pool. And it really is a great facility. It's used very heavily by the community. And it really is a kind of a center point of the town during the summer. We're able to employ a lot of students in either lifeguard capacity or just other positions around the pool. So the pool is great. We didn't have a pool in South Brunswick. Princeton has the business district. It's vibrant. We don't have a downtown South Brunswick. We have some disparate, you know, strip malls or other restaurants, but they're scattered around the town. There's kind of no one place you could go like you can here in Princeton. And then probably the biggest is just the university and dealing with the university and having that here and having the sports and the activities that the university generate. Having the arts here, you've got McCarter Theater, you've got the Arts Council. So there's a lot in that way that we did not have in South Brunswick. And it's really nice to be a part of that. Right. So I imagine, too, South Brunswick is a lot larger than Princeton, right? Princeton's like 18.
Yeah, so Princeton is roughly 18 square miles. South Brunswick is 42 square miles. South Brunswick historically was a farming community. We've a lot of those farms currently are warehouses, you know, 1 million square foot warehouses near Exit 8A. So South Brunswick was blessed by their geographic location being just off the turnpike, and we were able to get a lot of good rateables out of the warehouses. Obviously, we don't have that in Princeton. We don't have the land. We don't have access to, you know, a turnpike or a parkway or a major artery other than Route 1, which really isn't ideal for truck traffic.
What about as far as staff goes? I imagine staffing would be different.
So staffing was not, we had about 300 employees full-time. Here you've got about 250. There are some services that Princeton offers that we did not offer. You have a more robust human services, for example. You have in-house engineering where we use third-party engineering. So there are some in-house jobs that you have here in Princeton that are great to have, by the way, in-house, because it's nice to just go upstairs and talk with an engineer rather than having to deal with an outside firm, because it takes a little longer that way. South Brunswick we had in-house law, for example, which we don't have here, and that was nice. And as far as about the town as well, you know, Princeton's has about 31,000 residents. South Brunswick had about 50,000 residents. So it was a bigger town, South Brunswick, but the issues kind of on the ground are different.
So talk to us about your education. It sounds like you have a lot of education.
Sure, I have a little bit. I'll go back a little bit to the beginning. I am a proud graduate of South Brunswick High School, class of 1982. From there, I went to Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where I received my bachelor's degree in economics. Like I said, I worked for a couple years. Following that, I went to law school, went to Delaware Law School in Wilmington, Delaware, received my law degree, clerked for a judge, actually, in Middlesex County, the presiding judge of general equity, which was a great year for me. And then ultimately went on to get my Master's of Public Administration from the Harvard Kennedy School in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
That's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
So one thing I think that many people would ask is, what does an administrator actually do? What do you do?
So my day-to-day is very varied. I could have a list of 10 things I wanted to do today, and I get in, and there's an employee issue or a resident issue, and my whole day gets derailed. So as much as we try to plan what the day might look like, it can be very different. But there's a couple kind of main parts of my job as the administrator here, and they're set out in a code for Princeton. And probably the main one is implement the vision and the policies of the mayor and council. So I don't decide those. As you know, the mayor and council decide those, but it's up to me then to work with the, whether it be the employees or the contractors or whatever, to get those done and make sure we see those through. I'm involved in contract negotiations. I handle those for the unions and for the other employees who are not in the union. We work on their salaries. Any type of employee issue will come through HR, but then ends up on my desk, and we'll deal with those as they come up. I'm responsible for the preparation and the presentation of the budget, and I do that in tandem with the CFO every year, and we present that to council, and typically early in the year, and then council chews it over, makes some cuts, makes some changes, and then that gets adopted. Public relations is a part of it. I think it's really important in my job to get out there, to meet the people, meet the entities, the restaurants, the stores. They need to know there's someone there that they can go to when they have an issue. It's really important. As we always say when we go to ribbon cuttings, your success is our success. So if these restaurants or stores do not do well, that's a poor reflection on us. And it's good if we can keep the storefronts, filled and the people coming into town. That works well. And then really, interacting with the university. They're a huge part of who we are and what we are here. They take up a lot of real estate just across the street. We share Nassau Street, which for those who do not live in Princeton is a bustling, on one side is Nassau Hall and some incredibly beautiful buildings. The other side, also beautiful buildings, but they're storefronts and then residents or offices above. But it really is a place where things happen in Princeton, and it's important to work with the university on any number of fronts to make sure Princeton stays the Princeton that we know it is, and we preserve some of the historic character, which really makes it a neat place.
So one thing you mentioned, budget. And so, in your first year, your first budget, there was literally no increase in the tax rate to pay for the operating budget. Right. So that's a theme we're going to see every year. There'll be no tax increases going forward.
Wouldn't that be nice? No, it's great to come into a town where we have that. Obviously every town is not that fortunate, and we'll have years where it will be a bit of a struggle, and we'll have to cut some things maybe or adjust. But no, right now, we are in a good place budgetarily, and the town's in a neat place otherwise, because as we come out of COVID, we all want to make sure our businesses survive, the residents flourish. A lot of new things happening in town. You're the new mayor as of January. I'm the new administrator as of May. We've got a new superintendent, I think, as of July 1st. There's a new principal to the high school starting. University was not in session live last year. They're coming back in September. So it really is an exciting time for Princeton. So there is a lot, besides budgetarily, there's a lot going on here. And I think we're going to have some fun as we come out of this. As you know, the outdoor dining, for example, that was one of the very positive things that has come out of COVID. And that will continue. And as we look to reimagine Witherspoon Street, we're going to get more outdoor dining. So things like that are really positive, and I'm looking forward to implementing those.
So one thing that I know I get asked about a lot is the high taxes in Princeton, and that goes for the area. But I think one thing that people don't understand is the role Princeton plays in collecting taxes for the schools in the county, and maybe you could elaborate on.
Sure. So at least in New Jersey, the way it works, and it's true for every municipality, the municipality is the one who actually collects the taxes. We send out the tax bills, we collect the money. Unfortunately, that money doesn't stay here in Town Hall. We only get typically about 20% of whatever the taxes are. So if you pay $10,000 a year, $2,000 of your taxes go to the things I oversee, and that's parks, it's police, the sewers, engineering. So garbage pickup, for example. Another 60% roughly goes to the school system. So that's to educate our children. And then the other 20% goes to the county. So there's county roads, county parks. There's a whole, county system out there that people may or may not be that familiar with, but they get 20% of your tax payments as well. So we do only end up with about 20% at the end of the day, but because we collect it, we get painted with the high taxes are kind of our problem, our fault, whatever. But it's not the case because we are not the major driver of your average tax bill.
And one thing with the county that I always find confusing is that when the county sets their tax rate for each town, it's really based on how accurate the assessed values are of all the properties in the town?
Yeah, so it differs town to town, and I really never wrap my arms around that as well, but it is different. It's not like there's one rate and every town in the county will pay that rate. It is town to town. There are differences based on the tax rate as I understand it.
And I guess one thing we should just hit on too is, COVID, we thought we were out of it. The Delta variant has hit us hard, but I believe you and others at the municipal level, staff level, are working to address that?
Yeah, so we are blessed here in Princeton. We have a health officer who is phenomenal, and a lot of towns and municipalities use the county health system, which is fine. But for very local issues, it's great to have boots on the ground in your town. Our health officer, Jeff Grosser, has been fantastic from the beginning. Even though I was not an employee here and I was in South Brunswick, we were looking to him for guidance, and we looked at what was he doing in Princeton that we can kind of copy. Jeff and I meet regularly, as you know, to discuss kind of how the ground is changing with COVID. And while we thought it was improving, and it was for a while, we may have slipped back a little bit. So we're going to adjust that as well. And so what is town hall going to look like? What are our meetings going to look like? What is the masking requirements going to look like? So there's a lot out there, and that's going to change. That's going to change maybe even week to week. It depends on what the governor says. And what happens with the Delta variant or other variants that we may see down the road. But we have conducted our own vaccination clinics here, which is great. There's been a lot of community outreach. We have one of the highest vaccination rates in the state, which is fantastic. So we'll keep doing what we do, and we'll see where this goes.
Yeah. Let's just touch on Witherspoon Street for a second. You did mention it. There's state grant money there. There's all kinds of design work that needs to be done. But can we just give people an update on, is that going to be discussed more at the council level? Is there just what's going on?
So there was plenty of discussion prior to my getting there, and I suspect we're going to have a more discussion on that. But Witherspoon Street is currently it's currently one way, but it was historically a two-way street, led right up to kind of the steps of the university. If you went down Nassau, you go right into Nassau Hall. If you went down Witherspoon, you go into Nassau Hall. The sidewalks were modestly wide. There really wasn't any outdoor dining there. There was some foliage along the road, but it was really a pretty road. And as you look toward the university, it was a lovely viewscape. As we got into COVID and then there was outdoor dining, we moved some tables onto Witherspoon Street, which the public certainly loved, and it gave the restaurants an opportunity to generate additional business. It was discovered that, hey, maybe we can do this. And there was discussion whether we go back to two-way, make it one-way, or make it a pedestrian thoroughfare only. And I don't think the businesses really embraced the pedestrian thoroughfare, but I think the compromise was one-way coming off of Nassau Street, which is also Route 27 here. So it'll be one way that way. The new design calls for, some loading zones and some limited parking there. But the key feature is the expansion of the sidewalks inward from the buildings and more foliage to really make it pedestrian friendly, to drive people to the downtown, to drive people to the businesses, to drive people to the restaurants. And as we're finding with Heinz Plaza, which is near the library on Witherspoon Street, everyone is out now. Our parks are getting used. Any outdoor space is getting used. So really the change in Witherspoon Street, making it one way, will allow the public to enjoy the street in ways that they've not been able to enjoy it previously. And we're going to do it in a way where it's actually going to look good, because what we have now is kind of, was put together with electric tape and just to make it work so we can get tables out there for the restaurants. But there is a very thoughtful, fully engineered plan now, and I think it's going to look great. I think we're going to start in January, February of 2022.
Great. Bernie, thanks a lot. Appreciate you being here today.
Mark, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the third episode of the Princeton Podcast. Special thanks to our podcast guest, Bernie Hvozdovic, and our host, Mayor Mark Freda. The Princeton Podcast is produced as a community service by HG Media, providing audio, video, and website design services here in Princeton since 1999. If you enjoyed this episode of the Princeton Podcast, please share it with your friends. And be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.